Over the years, I've had a lot of conversations with friends, students, fellow musicians about best musicians, best guitar solos, best albums, best songs, all that kind of stuff. It's fun to have these discussions, kind of go down that rabbit hole of how this worked, how that worked. And I've really been thinking a lot about guitar solos lately. I've had a few conversations about that with some students recently, and what makes a great guitar solo, what makes a great song, all of that. And so I've kind of compiled here a list of my favorite guitar solos. And this is something that would change on another day. You know, these are not in any particular order. These are not always my favorites. But these are guitar solos that I consider just absolutely great for a variety of reasons. And it's really hard to quantify what makes music what it is. It's really hard to quantify what music is. And even when we look at this, we're looking at rock guitar solos. It's hard to quantify even what rock music is. I mean, like if you look at an artist like Bonnie Raitt, who's amazing, you could easily argue that she's a country artist, or that she's a rock artist, or that she's an old school R&B artist. You look at like a Rory Gallagher. It's blues, it's rock. Where does that fit into there? So I'm kind of using as my criteria kind of a very broad spectrum of things that would be included in the rock category, from raging metal to the Beatles, pop rock. All of that is inclusive in my decision making. No one else should agree with what I'm saying here necessarily. Some people will, some people won't. I'm fine with all of that. These are really just an opinion piece. These are things that I think fit into the category of great. So let's get into some guitar solos that should qualify as great. All right, let's start out with a longtime favorite of mine by the Beatles, Let It Be. I have very often said that we do not play music for people to hear. We play music for people to feel. If I were basing this list just off of the technical ability of guitar players, this solo wouldn't make the list. This is something if I had an intermediate level student ask me about this guitar solo, I'd be like, yeah, no problem. Let's get into this. George nailed this solo for the way it needed to fit into this song. And when you're first hearing this solo, the organ kind of drops down. You get this sense of anticipation in that first bent note of the solo. It drives straight through your chest, man. And you can feel this solo. You don't just hear the solo, you feel this solo. And once you've gotten accustomed to this song and you're anticipating this solo coming up, when I listen to this song, it's like I can see George walking out, because there had been no guitar in this song up to that point. And it's just like I can see George walking out and just getting ready to hit this solo, and it feels so good. If you aren't feeling this solo, you aren't listening to this song. There is a newer remix of this song. Newer is probably quite old now, but it's obviously newer than the original, and it's wrong. If you're the person who did the remix and you're listening to this and you find this offensive, good. You deserve a high five to the face with an SG or a Les Paul or some kind of guitar. They really destroyed the feel of the guitar solo in this by just almost gutting it with volume. In the original, it's the guitar solo really stands out and pushes forward, and in the remix, they dropped it down way too low, and it doesn't have the impact anymore. So definitely, if you want to hear this guitar solo, go try to find an original mix of this. Get it on vinyl if you have to, and listen to it the way it's meant to be listened to. Because yes, that is how it is meant to be listened to. Diary of a Madman, Randy Rhoads on guitar. Great guitarist. I've been a fan of Rhoads for many years, still am, and really enjoy the way that he plays, and just a very, very, very contrasted to the playing of George Harrison, who I also really like. And this, in this list, I'm looking for the variety of things that I like on a guitar. Rhoads was a precision guitar player, and his work on this Diary of a Madman album, it really showcases his precision work. Very exotic work. The whole song, it's got the classical influenced guitars, and it's got the choral elements. Diary of a Madman is kind of, in my opinion, a quintessential heavy metal song. It's got all of the elements that you would kind of ever look for in that. All of it. The tempo changes, the keys, the exotic work that's done on the guitars, the fact that it's about a madman, that's all just heavy metal. And the solo in this, the exotic work that Rhoads did on this solo, really showcased the idea of a person going insane. And what was done on this guitar solo is it was in I'm pretty sure it was a Hungarian minor. And so a Hungarian minor scale, if you take a standard minor scale, first you turn your guitar on. That makes a difference. If you take an A minor scale, you just have no sharps, no flats. A, B, C, D, E, F, G are the notes. It'd be like playing from A to A on white keys on a keyboard. Just a standard minor scale. If you take the fourth note and the seventh note, and you move those both up 1/2 step, that would be 1 fret on a guitar, it gives us this very exotic feel to this, it's a scale. We also refer to this often as a mode in music theory. This is the fourth mode of the Byzantine major scale, and it's got this great sound. And one of the things that ends up happening in this scale is you get an interval known as an augmented second between the third and fourth notes, and then you get another augmented second between the sixth and seventh notes of that scale. And Rhoads really exploited that kind of a feel there. And of course, I'm playing this with a clean tone guitar. He had a very heavily distorted sound going on. So, very different feel than what I'm doing here. But the way he exploited that scale to fit in with the theme of the song is just, I don't really like using the word perfection, but it's pretty close to that. It's really one of the all-time greats. So that, if you don't know the song, it's I think it's like a 7 or 8 minute long piece. Listen to the whole album. It's a really well done album. The compositions on it are great. One of the things I really liked about Rhoads, I read an interview with Ozzy Osbourne many years ago, and he said that when Rhoads first joined up with them, that they were talking, and he said to Ozzy, who I believe was still going by John at the time, he had analyzed a lot of music and found that most rock music was in E minor and A minor, which is largely because those scales are very easy to play on a guitar. And so Rhoads was like, let's move into some different keys and do this different stuff, and to get so that we're not just feeling like every other song. And so that's where he ends up with doing things like Hungarian minor, or get the song like Over the Mountain in, if I recall correctly, G sharp minor. And G sharp minor on the guitar. I think he was tuned down a half step on that, so it may have actually been G minor to the ear. But still, he's not just playing these really, kind of standard positions on the guitar. He moved around. That was a very big influence on me. That's something I've always really kind of strive for in my own work, is to be very diverse in my use of different keys. So yeah, Rhoads was a really big influence on me in that way. I feel like no list of solos is really complete without Jimi Hendrix. Again, big Hendrix fan. I mean, I'm probably pretty much going to say that with every guitar player I'm talking about here, with no big surprise. Hendrix was just a great guitarist. And one of the things that really appeals to me about Hendrix, and it's kind of appropriate to put him right next to Rhoads, because in this way they're almost polar opposite, where Rhoads was a very precision, almost perfectionist style guitar player. Hendrix really embraced the imperfection in music, in his own playing, and that was a very big part of his stylistic approach to how he put his music together. Was he wasn't going back and working things to perfection. He allowed the mistakes to come through. This is also, with Hendrix and many other players who embrace this ideology, this has very much influenced me as a guitar player as well. A great example of this in my own work is the song A Silent Prophet off of my album Incomprehensible Isolation, my 65th album. And in that, I was playing this guitar solo. It's in E minor, and I was kind of playing along, and I hit this sharp 4. And so I just took it up to the 5. This was right at the end of the guitar solo. It was an improvisational work, and I was just kind of hanging on that. I'm like, oh, is this solo gonna work? Let me just go up the half step to the 5, and then the rhythm guitars take over on the root. And I ended up liking that so much that I actually wrote it into the sheet music, so that when I performed the song, I would repeat that the same way. I would put that augmented fourth in there, that out of key note. And that's the kind of thing that Jimi would do. He would play a wrong note, and then he would make that note feel right. I think that's kind of how I feel about Jimi's work, is he was able to make any note, whether it was a right note or a wrong note, he was able to make it feel right. By embracing this concept of imperfection is a good thing in music. And I was recently listening to an interview with Steve Vai and Joe Satriani, and they were asked, what is a perfect guitar solo? And they both thought of the song Machine Gun by Jimi Hendrix, with a live version of it. And my favorite Hendrix song is Wind Cries Mary. And, I think of his guitar solos, and that one always comes to mind. Of course, like the really bluesy killer guitar solo on Red House or Hey Joe. Those are so great. But I went and I listened to this live version of Machine Gun, which I hadn't heard the live version before. And I kind of really had to agree with Joe and Steve on that. It's like, that speaks to me. And one of the things that really struck me on this particular guitar solo that I had never noticed in Hendrix's music before, and this was just earlier today, I was listening to this as I was prepping for this video, and it struck me that the similarity in the tonal quality of Jimi's guitar and Jimi's voice. And it really makes me want to go back and listen to more of his music just for that comparison. And it's almost like I could hear in his guitar what his voice would be doing if he was singing the guitar solo. And it was a very interesting comparison that, like I said, I've just never really noticed in Jimi's work prior to today. Even I've been listening to Jimi for many years, and that was a really cool thing. And Jimi's guitar tone has been, much talked about. I really like Jimi's guitar tone. I think he did some really good sounds coming out of his guitar. But that really struck me, and it just, the way his guitar had such a vocal quality to it. It's just one of those things that makes, even if you don't know that it's happening, these are the kinds of things that some players do that just make them stand out above and beyond other players. And I think that Jimi absolutely stands out above and beyond other players. So there's that. So yes, the live version of Machine. There are several live versions. The one I listened to was at the live at Berkeley, and yeah, absolutely killer. It worth a good, strong listen. Next up, a longtime favorite of many people. One of, I believe, the more influential guitar solos that has ever been done. And this is Eruption by Eddie Van Halen. This came out on the first Van Halen album. And this is something that, when this came out, guitar players just kind of had to shift the way they thought. Because they're hearing this, and this was something pretty new. We didn't have this kind of guitar solo going, particularly recorded on an album where it's like on there as a song, and it just absolutely raged. Now, some people have kind of through the years ended up, making fun of Eruption. It's not considered, something that would stand up today as like the highest level of playing, because tapping now is very common, and we have guitar players who play just crazy fast. But at the time this came out, Eddie Van Halen as a guitarist and Van Halen as a band, in my opinion, were one of the true game changers, because after Van Halen happened, the way that performance and guitar playing happened changed more than with almost any other guitar player. And there are tons of really influential guitar players out there, but the level at which change occurred with this group in particular is close to unparalleled. It's hard to find another instance in rock music where it's like, that happened and now we're all going to change. So it's huge. And even if you're a person who's like, old Van Halen, Eruption, really listen to that. Sit down with the recording and just listen to that and think about what it was like in the 70s, because I think that came out in like 76, 70. I don't remember when that came out. I was quite young. I didn't even play guitar yet when that came out. I actually had a neighbor down the street, Tommy, who was an older kid, and he went to the Van Halen concert. So he was like the cool kid. And so we were out asking him questions about, what that concert was like. And at that time, I had not even yet been to a concert. But that song, that solo, absolutely should be on the list of all-time greats. While Eddie Van Halen was just absolutely raging, it was almost the start of the shred fest that would take place in short order. Almost on the opposite end of the spectrum is a guitar player like David Gilmore. And Gilmore, in my opinion, can say more with a note than most guitarists, including myself, can say with a song. He has such a means of expression with just a note. And this is captured, I think, largely by his use of bends and vibratos. For non-musicians who may not be familiar with the terms, a bend is when you take a note and push it to a different note. And a vibrato is when you give you subtly change the pitch of that note. And depending on the instrument you're playing, the way that a person will do a bend or a vibrato can have a lot of variation. I was always taught by one of my main guitar teachers, Kevin Hughes, that these are really the two primary ways that you have your own voice as a guitarist. And to this day, I will still occasionally take lessons from Kevin. I mean, I've known him for 35 plus years now, I think. Yeah, it's been a long time. And we will still talk about, how to use this for expression and how to incorporate this in your phrasing. And when we look at, like singers will do a bend differently than a guitar player will. Of course, on a piano, you can't do a bend. That's not how pianos work. You can't do a vibrato. And so like one of my favorite singers of all time, Ella Fitzgerald, she'll if you listen to the song Angel Eyes off of the album Let No Man Write My Epitaph, and just as she first comes in, just listen to the way she bends her voice between the first couple syllables on that, and it's just stunning. That's something I will put on Angel Eyes and I will play along with her voice and try to emulate Ella's bends. And, and also with a voice, you will do a vibrato differently because a voice can go above and below a particular pitch, where a guitar, no matter which way I move the string, the pitch can only go up from the original. There are some ways you can kind of trick the guitar to do a subtle vibrato where it moves down a little bit, which is more of kind of you might think of it as a cello style vibrato. But David Gilmore, the way he does his vibratos and his bends really creates this trademark sound that is very much him. There's certainly a lot of note selection things that go on with that. And he's very much a blues-based player, and he does a lot of pentatonic and blues-based stuff, but he doesn't just sit and work around a basic pentatonic scale. He understands how to incorporate notes outside of that, how to bend to those notes. And one really big trademark of Gilmore is normally we will bend up 2 frets, or we will bend up 1 fret. And generally that's going to be based on, where does this note sit in the scale and where's the next note. But Gilmore will commonly bend up 3 frets or 4 frets. So a full step or, a step and a half, 2 steps. And so those really big bends that he does are a big part of that. And when you listen to Comfortably Numb, let's get to the actual song I'm talking about here. That is, again, it's Comfortably Numb being part of the album The Wall. It's a concept album, and it's all based on a story. And I feel like you get as much of the story from the guitar solo as you do from the lyrics. And in a way, you kind of get more, because the story here isn't just about telling this particular story. It's about how this story makes you feel. Again, as I said back when I was talking about George Harrison, we don't play music for people to hear. We play music for people to feel. And this one, there's so much that you feel particularly if you listen to this in the story context. Listen through the album and get to this song, which, should not be something that would be a difficult thing for people to do. I mean, it's The Wall. Listen to The Wall. It's worth your time. And you get to this and you really, you've kind of sunk yourself into this story with a little more depth. And it hits really effectively. Great guitar solo by a great guitarist. And I hope you all, of course, enjoy that as well. Cliffs of Dover by Eric Johnson. This song actually took me a long time to appreciate. My older brother gave me a cassette tape of Avia Musicom in the mid-90s. I think it was shortly after I got out of the military. And I tried to listen a few times, and the intro song didn't really do much to me. And I don't know if the actual Avia Musicom track, it wasn't doing it for me. And retrospectively, I don't know why. If it had been on CD, I would have skipped to track 2. I would have heard Cliffs of Dover, and it would have just immediately, I would have fallen in love with it. But I never really, I just didn't give the tape a fair chance. And that's totally on me. Once I finally started listening to that album in full, I was like, wow, this is just great stuff. And something that I really like about Eric Johnson, and this, again, I mentioned Kevin Hughes before, this is something he and I have talked about a lot, is when you create music as a guitarist, a unique thing about, I shouldn't say unique, a somewhat unique aspect of guitar is that you can play the same, oh, that's the one slightly out of tune, but you can play the same note in multiple spots on the guitar. And it gives you a lot of options because you can play notes on multiple spots on the guitar. You can play chords, and you can play a D chord there. I can play a D chord there. And that's the same 4 notes, and they will have a slightly different sound. The main riff for Cliffs of Dover is one that can be played very easily if you use the open 3rd string of the guitar. But what Eric does is he moves that note down to the 5th fret. And so which is just a G power chord. And then he puts on the major 6, and then you got to get your pinky up here. And I'm not playing it the same way that's played in the song. There's probably some pedantic lawyer out there thinking, "Oh gosh, I get to do a copyright strike on the Mad Poet because he's going to play Cliffs." Well, I didn't play it, so go cry to your mommy. And then he ends up putting the 7 in there, and it's fairly challenging to play, but it's such a great piece. I was hired to play Cliffs of Dover. Oh, this was probably 7 or 8 years ago now. And it was for a wedding reception. And this gal, Claire, she contacted me through a mutual friend. She had been looking for someone to play this song. She and her fiance had contacted, I think she said like 3 or 4 bands or other musicians, and said, is this something you could play? And they're all like, no. And she got in touch with me, and I said, well, when's your wedding going to be? How long do I got? Because I'm going to need at least a few months. She said, oh, we're 18 months out. I'm like, okay, you know what you're doing. That's good. And it was, I already knew that the basic song. It had been a long time since I had played it, but I worked it up and worked note for note what Johnson did. It was, to really nail that piece of music, it took a long time. I probably didn't earn enough money for the amount of time I put in. It's because Eric Johnson never shies away from playing things in a more challenging way. Sometimes there's this easier way to play it, but if you play it with that easier way, then it won't really sound quite right. It'll sound close, but you kind of got to, do that, the twist and certain things. So sometimes he'll incorporate, both pick and picking with fingers, which creates a different sound. And of course, there's things over here where, there's a really easy place to play this note, but he plays it in a harder place. And going through it the way I did for, I probably played that song 300 times or more getting ready for that performance. And I was very pleased with the way it came out. But it really gave me an appreciation for the approach that Eric Johnson takes to his music. And again, when we're looking at, these various guitar players, we see, players like, George Harrison. We got, Jimi Hendrix. They're less, perfectionist style players. We have a Eric Johnson or Randy Rhoads, and they're very much perfectionist style guitar players. And you see someone like David Gilmore kind of in between there. He always seems to play the right note, but there's kind of a carefree nature to how he gets there. But it works really well, and it's having this variety of inputs as a guitarist. As a musician, really kind of as a person, it helps you to be to give you a way of thinking about what you're doing in a more well-rounded way. And that, in my opinion, as a longtime music educator, always going to be a good thing. And the feel of the song is just great. It's just got drums, bass, and guitar, just a single guitar. He does straight through everything on it. There's not like my recordings, they got, rhythm guitar left, rhythm guitar right, solo, lead guitar and all of that. And it's just a 3-piece. And so they can do it live, just like it is on the album. And it's great. And I've never seen Eric Johnson live. I have seen videos of them doing this live, and he nails it live, which is awesome. Scuttle Buttin, Stevie Ray Vaughan. Love me some Stevie Ray Vaughan. Great guitarist. And I could probably do just, multiple videos just on Stevie and his playing style. This particular song, Scuttle Buttin, it's one of my favorites. It's like so many of these artists that I'm talking about here, it's really hard to pick out a favorite song. There are so many great things. And when you look at someone like Stevie Ray Vaughan, like if you just compare the song Scuttle Buttin, which is this really fast-paced, kind of driven thing, and you compare that to The Sky Is Crying, which is this more laid back, really a lot of, big bends and just great feel to it. It's just so different in his approach on these things. And again, Stevie was one of those players that very unique, and he had a great style. Now, with the blues, we don't really think about the blues as being like a perfectionist style of playing, but I always got a sense that even though Stevie had kind of a reckless feel to how he did that, to how he played, I think he was very precise in his recklessness, which I find really cool. And that's a great place to be. So you can kind of be on that borderland between, precision and chaos. When I first was introduced to Scuttle Buttin, it was actually as a guitar tablature in a magazine. And so I was playing this, and I was like, I want to hear this. I had never heard it before. I'd only seen the sheet music, so I knew how to play it, but I really wasn't sure if I was playing it right. And something that has always really bothered me as a guitarist when it comes to Stevie Ray Vaughan is not about Stevie. It's about transcriptions of his music. And so this, starts. And it's been so long since I played it now, I don't know where but it starts with a fairly standard blues thing that's always transcribed as a bend. But something that Stevie did, and if you watch him play Scuttlebutt live, you'll see this, he slides up. And he was so good with his articulation that people would hear him do this kind of standard blues, and he would do the slide, but people would interpret it as a bend. And that was a really cool aspect of his playing. And this, when you are learning to be a musician, how you articulate your notes with speed, with tempo, with slides and bends, and how you pick the note, the angle of your pick, and the speed and the kind of weight of your attack, and so many other things really lend to what your musical voice is. And so this was something that in Stevie Ray Vaughan's feel, he was great at doing bends. And like I said, you hear that in The Sky Is Crying. And there's a bunch of bends in Scuttle, but in that main opening riff, he's actually doing a slide. So that, those are really great things to kind of listen for, that it's a very standard blues feel to it, but he's not doing it in a very standard way. He's doing it in his way. And that is, I think, a big part of what gave him his unique voice. And I was reading some commentary about his last concert that was performed on the night that he died in the helicopter crash. And he had cleaned up. He was off drugs at the time. And it sounds like it was just one of his greatest performances ever. And apparently, there were, a bunch, I think like Buddy Guy, I think Eric Clapton might have been. There's a bunch of like really heavy hitters in the blues were at this concert. And they were all going to go out and perform. And they said that they're coming out for this encore. And Stevie just hit one note on his guitar. And it was just like huge. It's like, how did he make that one note sound that big? But that's just, that was Stevie's style. And he had, if I understand correctly, he had very big hands. He used very thick guitar strings. He would hit his guitar very hard. And and these other guitar players were all, again, great. I'm a big Buddy Guy fan as well. But they're playing their guitar a different way. And they just said that it was just so Stevie, a shame that he passed so young. I think he would have had a lot more to say on his guitar and with his voice. But at least we got Scuttle Buttin. We got his other work. We got these recordings, and so we'll keep listening to that. But let's move to a guitarist that, in my opinion, doesn't get enough credit. We're going to talk about Alex Lifeson of the band Rush. Great guitarist. The guitar solo I'm looking at here is La Via Strangiato. La Via Strangiato is on the album Hemispheres. And it's an instrumental. I think it's like 8 or 9 minutes long. I haven't listened to it I need to pull that one out because that is a great piece. And it's like all over the place. And Alex had a great diversity to him. One of the things with Alex's style, in my opinion, is he was part of this 3-piece. And he had to make his guitar sound huge. So he really experimented with a lot of how he would do chords. So, one thing we hear in Rush a lot is like sus9 chords. And if you're a Rush fan, you'll kind of hear Rush in just that chord right there. You're like, yeah, that's a very Alex Lifeson kind of a feel right there. Just by playing that chord, that will feel comfortable to you. Even though that's not, like some Rush thing. That's just strumming a chord. And Alex, when he was doing a guitar solo, he could make his guitar howl like a wounded angel. And it's like you could hear his guitar lament in deepest torment. And you could hear the glory of creation all at the same time. You don't really... When people talk about the greatest guitar players, Lifeson comes up occasionally, but not enough. Not enough. When you see a list of the greatest guitar players, of all the 100 greatest rock guitar players, if Alex Lifeson's name is not on there, It's one of the ways you know the list just isn't valid, because he should be, because he really is a great guitar player, and kind of in some ways a groundbreaking guitar player. I think that there's much more influence from Alex than is given credit for. Rush, again, I could probably do a full video on every one of these artists and so many more. But they were very much a musical anomaly, in my opinion. And this La Via Strangiato, great piece of work. If you want to get Alex Lifeson's autograph, listen to Hemispheres, listen to La Via Strangiato. That is Alex Lifeson's signature. Black Star, Yngwie Malmsteen. Yngwie has been a somewhat polarizing figure in the rock and metal community through the years. With no regard to what you think of Malmsteen as a person, if you don't think he's a great guitar player, you're just wrong. I really became a fan of him as a teenager. I was introduced to him by a friend who was a guitar player, and this was kind of in my off period. I had started playing guitar as a kid. I gave it up for a few years, then I started playing again in my later teens. So this was kind of this in-between stage, and this friend of mine was a guitar player, and he was real into Malmsteen, and so played some of the work for me, and it's like mind-blowing. And that first album of Malmsteen's, which was just called Rising Force, I think I got that right. Oh man, it's been such a long time since I've looked at the Malmsteen discography. There's some incredible stuff. And this debut album, the first song is Black Star. It opens the album and it sets the tone for the album. And I believe it really kind of set the tone for a lot of his future work. This whole album did. And if I understand correctly, this wasn't really quite the music that he wanted to make, but he did it extremely well. He did a great job of putting together instrumental, kind of neoclassical music. So I'm going to break in here. I was just about to publish this video, and I went to look up how to spell Yngwie Malmsteen's name, not a real standard name. Ended up on his Wikipedia page, and I'm a bit of a reader, so I was reading through it, and I found that I had given out I was about to give out some misinformation, as I had done the last version of this for Black Star. For my entire music playing life, I have been under the impression that Jimi Hendrix had been a really big influence on Yngwie Malmsteen, and I found out that is not true. I went in and looked up some interviews where he talks about this, and he specifically states that he was not heavily influenced by Hendrix. And I had spent a bit of time talking about how his influences had kind of shaped him, and most of that was about Johann Sebastian Bach. But I had put a bit in there about Jimi Hendrix. And I really don't want to put out misinformation if I can avoid it. So I'm glad that I found this when I did. And so it turns out really his two primary influences were Johann Sebastian Bach is clearly number one, and also Paganini, the violinist. And great classical music produced by both of these. And the basic idea of how we use our influences is true no matter who your influences are. You very clearly hear a very Bachiana type of playing in Malmsteen's guitar work and all of his compositions. Bachiana simply means in the style of Bach. And so it's unfortunate that I got that wrong, but the idea that, how we use our influences to create our music. And Randy Rhoads was one of the early kind of progenitors of the neoclassical guitar playing style. Malmsteen definitely took that to another level, and I think that his influences, being Paganini and Bach so primarily, really shaped the way he plays. And I've heard some interviews with Malmsteen where he talks about his kind of coming of age story. A very common thread with guitar playing and when you're talking to guitar teachers is people don't want to learn scales. This is something I don't understand. I'm kind of a scale freak myself. I've been studying scales for decades and I still just love it. And when you hear Malmsteen talk about his coming of age as a guitarist, you hear a lot of information about studying scales. And he says the same kind of stuff I do. Is you don't have to do this to become an accomplished guitarist, but it really does help a lot. And what you get to is you learn what scales are, and you learn how to use scales on your guitar, and then through your influences, you learn how to manipulate those scales. And it's not just this, here's this set of 7 notes that I am required to use, and I'm required to specifically and only use these notes. It's like, no, okay, maybe I'm playing in a minor scale, but I'm going to, sharp the 6 and get a little bit of a Dorian flair. The music theory geeks out there will know what that means. And so there's all of these ways that we can start to manipulate these scales. And that, I think, is where Malmsteen really excelled. He's clearly a rather intelligent gentleman. And, you can hear that in the way he speaks, particularly the way he speaks about music. And so he was able to take these influences and understand how Bach would use diminished chord substitutions and how Paganini would put together his violin solo runs and these things, and really incorporate that onto this instrument that he loves so much, of the guitar. Whether you are a neoclassical shredder like Malmsteen, or maybe your biggest influences are Cancer, Slug, and the Misfits, you're actually doing that same thing. Where a player like Malmsteen excels is he knows that he's doing it. And I played in a punk band for about 3 years, 2.5, 3 years, and it was so much fun. I had a blast playing punk. A lot of the players that I played with, they, if you say, hey, play an F sharp, they're like, I don't know where an F sharp is. I don't know what an F sharp is. And so, you'd watch them play, and they were good players. But they didn't know what they were doing. They knew the shapes, they knew the positions, but they didn't really know why. And I'm a very analytical person myself, and I think this is what draws me a lot to the way that I produce my music. And I see this, I think, in someone like Yngwie Malmsteen. He very much knows why these notes are working the way they're working, these phrases, these chords, why this is all being put together in this particular way. So it was a little bit of a shock to me when I read that. I'm like, wait a minute, Hendrix was not an influence. That's crazy. Turns out what the story was that when I believe it was on the day that Hendrix passed, he had seen a newscast, and on the newscast they had shown the footage from, I believe it was the Monterey Festival, where Hendrix lit his guitar on fire. And he was just kind of really like, oh man, that is super cool. This guy's lit his guitar on fire on stage. And I agree, that's really cool if you can afford to and want to light your guitars on fire. I do not want to light my guitars on fire. I like them. They're awesome. But, that being said, I have destroyed guitars on stage before. They were always stunt guitars for me. We would have an extra guitar off in the back. That's the one we're going to smash with an axe handle, or that's the one we've got an M80 inside of, and we're going to blow that up in the front yard. It's a lot of fun. So I think that Hendrix was probably more of an influence on Malmsteen in his performance, in his visual. I've seen Malmsteen 2 or 3 times. He's great on stage. He is definitely a performer, and he has, I believe that he has really gotten into entailed studies of as many aspects of guitar playing, performance, recording, music, composition, arrangement. I think he's really tried to study as much of that as he could. And that's what, even in his younger days, because Black Star, the solo in question here, that was on his first album. You know, he didn't have nearly as much experience, probably early 20s. I'm not sure how old he was when he put that out. But he had started playing guitar quite young, and it seems, from what I understand of him, that he had just a very dedicated study for how he was going to approach becoming a guitarist. And I think he did extremely well with it. Solos like Black Star, and really pretty much everything on that first album, his debut album, I think really speaks to that. And when you hear his second album as well, I believe I already mentioned that, you know, the music on his first album wasn't quite what he wanted to do. He wanted to have vocals and, you know, do more of the power metal, as it were. And on his second album, he brought in Jeff Scott Soto as the singer, and they did a great job on that album as well. And you can kind of hear this progression from the first album to the second album, and where he would end up going with, you know, all of the orchestral stuff that he worked with later on. And so that progression and that understanding, I think that being a very analytical learner was what got Malmsteen to the type of playing that he does. And we can't deny that his influence has been really, really far-reaching in the guitar playing community, and I think just in the heavy metal rock community in general. He's a fairly well-known name, very much worth checking out. Thank you for putting up with my little intrusion here from Past Randy, but I think Past Randy will be pleasantly happy with the fact that we're not putting out misinformation. Don't want to do that. So Hendrix was not a primary influence on Malmsteen. Let's move on. For this next great guitar solo, let's go back to 1955. In fact, let's go back from 1985 to 1955, when Marty McFly had to fill in on guitar for Marvin Berry at the Enchantment Under the Sea dance so that his parents would get together. Such a great movie. And that pivotal scene of Marty McFly filling in on guitar, and his parents get back together, and then he goes into that absolutely raging version of Chuck Berry's Johnny B. Goode, goes into that guitar solo, and it fit the movie so well. And it was such a great guitar solo. And one thing I got to say here, Michael J. Fox did a great job of making it look like he actually played that. I believe that Michael J. Fox is, in fact, a guitarist, so he had some experience. The gentleman who actually played the guitar solo on that was a gentleman named Tim May. And from what I've heard about this is they told Tim that they were looking for a guitar solo that was going to encompass how guitar playing had changed from 1955, Chuck Berry era, up through the current time frame, which was 1985. You know, this kind of 30-year period, which was really a strong period of growth for guitar playing. And he did a great job of that, you know, going right out of Johnny B. Goode into this, you know, kind of Chuck Berry style solo, and up through this kind of Van Halen style solo, and into the you know, at the time, modern 80s sound and feel. You know, one thing that's also really important in a guitar solo is its resolution. I shouldn't even say guitar solo. In music, resolution really matters. And one of the things I really dig about the resolution of this is the resolution was actually Michael J. Fox. You know, you get up to the end of that solo where he's got that note bent up, and he's, you know, kind of looking around like, oh, everyone's staring at me. Then he gets on the mic and he says, oh, guess you're not ready for that yet, but your kids are going to love it. That was really kind of the resolution to the guitar solo. And it just, the whole thing worked so well for that movie and for the feel of the song. Tim did such a great job on that. And a fun fact about Back to the Future, the guitar that Marty McFly was playing is a Gibson ES-345, which did not actually go into production until 1958. So they had the wrong guitar for the time frame. And that is how we know that Back to the Future was not actually a documentary. That was very unrealistic. The rest of it definitely could have happened. Probably did. That kind of stuff happens to me all the time. For my last one here, we're going to go with Unknown by Unknown. There's a problem with this list, or any list like this, whether it's made by me or by someone else, because when we do this, it's based on some very limiting factors. In this case, those limiting factors are recorded music and my personal experience. I have been in stadiums watching concerts, in coffee shops, in bars, in venues, in garages, and I have seen amazing shows and I have seen absolute garbage shows. And sometimes you're in some random place and there's some random guitar player on stage that's just like, what did I just bear witness to? It's just some of the most amazing guitar playing you can even imagine. And then the next day you're like, I don't remember that person's name. I saw this amazing show, don't even know how to look them up. And this happens all over the place in all kinds of music. And I think one of the best guitar solos I ever did was an on-stage thing. I had gone through a very bad breakup, and this girl and I were in a performance group together, and it was really emotively challenging. She had broken up with me, broken my heart, and we had to perform together. And we pulled it off, but it you know, there was a lot of anger, there was a lot of emotion going on. And in one of these shows, there was a spot where I broke out into a guitar solo, which is, you know, the rest of the band is tacit, and it's heavy metal style music. And just, you know, did this raging solo. And you do this part of the show, you know, I had been in this group for several years. But on that night, man, just all of that emotion, it just coalesced there. And after that, it's like, I mean, there were probably 40 or 50 people in this performance group, and almost everyone came to me like, dude, that guitar solo, that was crazy. And I was talking with a friend after this had kind of blown over, and I was still struggling. I had parted ways with the group, and I was still kind of struggling with it. And then they said, well, you know, did this anger you're harboring, what good has come of it? And I said, that guitar solo. And they were just like, okay, yeah. You know, and that's just, you know, a personal experience of mine, but this happens all over the place. There could be a guitarist right now doing a practice with some punk band, just doing the most amazing thing, and no one's ever going to hear it because it's not being recorded, and no one's sitting there even watching. You know, the only people who are going to see it are the band members, and it's just, you know, so many of these, and I've seen this with drummers and with trumpeters and violinists, you know, doing this amazing stuff. It's a one-off deal because it's a live performance out there, or it's a practice or something, and it's just completely amazing. And so if I were going to be asked, what is the greatest guitar solo, I think I would have to answer with Unknown by Unknown, because there's so much more music that we don't have access to than that we do. And I think a lot of the greatest stuff has happened in that realm. You know, and so, you know, if I were going to put an action item on this video, I'd say go out and start listening to music you wouldn't normally listen to. Go see shows in person. You know, and you know, these days, you know, there's a lot of shows online, but they're a live thing. Go watch live music and see these one-off performances that are sometimes going to leave you really wanting. You know, you might tune into Twitch or YouTube or something and see some of the most mundane musical performances you've ever seen, or you might see something that completely blows your mind. And then if you're a musician, then you go and you see this amazing thing, and you're like, what was that? And talk to that musician and find out who they are and get a sense of what they do and what created that moment. Because, as musicians, we're not just creating music, we're creating moments, we're creating scenarios, if you will. And, incorporate those ideas. Man, I saw a person doing this thing and I want to figure it out on my guitar. My dad told me a story of back when he was in the Air Force. And surf rock started to come out, and he had a buddy that played guitar who was trying to figure out the thing that kind of became like the mainstay of surf rock. And it took him a while to figure out, oh, that's a slide and tremolo picking at the same time. And of course, once he got it, he was very excited. But that's the kind of thing where you see this. And there was a time when that was new. That's nothing special anymore, but at the time that was new. And you see this new thing, or you hear this new thing, or you feel this new thing. And how do you incorporate that into your creative process as a musician? Or, even if you're not a musician, how does that affect the way you listen to music? After people heard, for example, Eddie Van Halen doing Eruption, they listened to music a little differently. They started hearing things in music that they may not have listened to before. And of course, hypothetically, that's going to happen anytime you hear music, is you get this new information and you're going to, that's going to affect how you move forward as a listener. But it's something that is worth being cognizant of. How does this affect me as a listener, as a musician, as a creative artist of any kind? And what am I going to do with that? So go out, experience new music, different types of music, and just go get it.